Hey everyone, so One Piece chapter 1093 just came out, and this was a really fun fight scene. I think last chapter, I had a lot of complaints about Luffy versus Kizaru, the way that it was starting, and mainly the fact that Luffy was not using Advanced Conqueror's Haki. I still have those same issues, but I am mentally setting those aside just to enjoy the creativity of what we're getting right now. At the end of the day, Kizaru, as an extremely versatile character, with light abilities offering him so many different avenues of attack, so many different tricks, versus Luffy, who basically has, you know, the sky's the limit, there is no limit really outside of his imagination to what he can do, it makes for a really, really fun matchup. And I think that it was a good way to sort of start things off by having Luffy first go up against Kaido, who's more of a, at least relative to Kizaru, more of a one-dimensional fighter, using more so just straightforward brute force and fisticuffs, well, you know, a club and everything like that as well. But mainly, you know, he's close quarters combat, just very physical, very strong, brute, destructive force, right? Kizaru has a lot of tricks up his sleeve, and Kizaru also has a similar sort of personality and vibe to Gear 5th Luffy. A little bit different, but that same sort of, as people like to say, that sort of troll, you know, troll face Kizaru, trolly Kizaru, he's kind of goofing around a little bit too. I mean, neither of them are really goofing around. They both want to win the fight, but they both have a certain attitude that you're not really going to get out of any other matchup between two other characters at this level. So I'm appreciating that. I'm enjoying that. The Advanced Conqueror's Haki thing, I still think is... It just is plot-induced stupidity, because normally for stories to have a character, you know, hold back their ability, it almost always makes sense. Yeah, they don't want to give like maximum effort, they want to hold back their ability. It just doesn't make sense for Luffy, because the ability he's choosing to use instead is actually more effort, but getting him, but less effective than using Advanced Conqueror's Haki as far as we've seen. So it's a huge outlier in terms of all basically shonen power-ups that I've ever seen heroes have. I've just never seen anything like this, and there's literally no in-story reason for Luffy to ever not use Advanced Conqueror's Haki first before Gear 5th. You can say some situations like against Lucci just to have fun, but this is not one of those situations, because clearly against Kizaru he actually wants to win. He went Gear 4th Snake Man first, and then he went Gear 5th, but for some reason he's just avoiding using Advanced Conqueror's Haki, even though it's a lot stronger and way less taxing on his body than either Gear 4th or Gear 5th. It makes no sense. Look at that, I complained about it anyway, despite me saying I wouldn't, so I'll try and check myself going forward, because reality is I did enjoy everything we got out of this fight, because with Gear 5th, I'm always looking for... anytime Luffy's breaking it out, I'm always looking for something new, right? It's really hard to do a new cartoon take every single time, or show us something that, like a trick or a gag that he hasn't done before with Gear 5th, because at a certain point, you know, you have to recycle ideas. We've seen Giant Luffy grab characters and do things with characters before. We've seen the eyes popping out of sockets plenty of times. Still cool. But I'm always looking for some new trick with Gear 5th. That's why I really enjoyed the Lucci fight, when Luffy concluded it by pulling out the little goggles before he did the rocket move to take out Lucci. Stuff like that. Like, always something that lets you still keep guessing as to what are we going to get next time we see Gear 5th, right? So I enjoyed that with the Lucci fight. The Lucci fight also had a little moment where Lucci goes through a wall, and then we see like the cartoon silhouette that you see often of like a character that's smashed into a wall with Luffy coming out of it. That plus the goggles thing. So we got the unique stuff from the Lucci fight. I was curious to see, is Oda really going to be able to keep this sort of thing up for the rest of the story? Is he, every time Luffy gets a new fight in Gear 5th, is Oda going to be able to think of something new, or at least novel in some way, or some sort of twist on something Luffy's already done that we haven't seen before? And we're already getting that in the Kizaru fight, because what really stood out to me this chapter was the way Luffy kind of finished off, with Luffy swooping in to eat one of Kizaru's lasers. Like, literally he ate it, and then following that up with the light explosion basically coming out of his eyes, his body, etc., and he just lights up like a lamp pretty much. That's really cool to me, because it's what you've seen in cartoons plenty of times before, like a character eats a stick of dynamite and goes off and like smoke's coming out of their ears or something like that, or even something like hot sauce or something like that, and we've seen that sort of like explosion coming out of a character's head. So this was Luffy doing that in the midst of a fight against a top tier, or whatever you want to call, admiral level character in One Piece, which is pretty insane. Like, this is a high stakes battle, and we're getting that sort of comedy incorporated there. At the end of the day, I have my nitpicky, I suppose. I don't think they're nitpicky, but, you know, whatever you want to call them. I have my complaints about Advanced Conquerors Haki and Oda shoving that aside for the sake of just more Gear 5th, but when it's so entertaining, it's like, okay, I'll just turn that part off of my brain, I suppose, and just be like, whatever, it doesn't matter. Let Luffy completely run out of stamina with Gear 5th and then have some manufactured tension or something later. Who knows? Whatever, it's still fun to watch while it's going on. That's the thing about Gear 5th, it's just too much fun to not enjoy, in my opinion. So, it's not just Luffy though. You know, Kizaru with the light clones and everything like that, and actually duping Luffy by not ultimately fighting with any of the light clones, but using that as a distraction to go actually achieve his mission objective. Luffy having to catch on, Luffy doing the stamp move that basically does a sort of spiral. I think all of that was really fun to see throughout this chapter. Luffy's expressions, Kizaru's expressions, the fight's turning out really, really well. I think I wouldn't be surprised if this fight, I think for me it's already a bit more entertaining than Luffy versus Lucci, although I enjoyed Luffy versus Lucci. I wouldn't be surprised just with the variety of abilities that we get, that in terms of pure entertainment value, I might enjoy it more than Gear 5th Luffy versus Kaido by the time all is said and done. Gear 5th Luffy versus Kaido, obviously the narrative stakes were higher with it being the conclusion of the entire Wano arc, but I'm saying pure entertainment value, the matchup between these two characters with the wide range of what they can do, and we still haven't seen Logia Awakening. I'm really looking forward to the next chapter and the continuation of this fight. On the flip side, we have Zoro versus Lucci, which is, so I did a poll on stream, right? There's already so much debate and discussion regarding Advanced Conquerors Haki. What are the clearest, what is the most single consistent indicator? That's what people are really looking for, right? Because you can find indicators in plenty of different ways, but is there one single clear indicator that Oda does every time? I think we're all still somewhat looking for that. I think some people feel like they found it, some people whatever. But with Zoro, it's just this extra headache because Zoro, on top of the confusion that already exists with us trying to clearly come to a consensus of what represents Advanced Conquerors Haki, Zoro's off on his own island with his own added extra BS over here of his swords being on fire. His swords just, you know, now he's got Hellfire mode Zoro or whatever, and now we've got, and he's the only person that does this type of thing. So we have no other reference point with him. So on top of the existing vagueness and confusion of Advanced Conquerors Haki, Zoro's just adding this extra element in that makes it even more unclear as to whatever the heck he's doing. I am not going to say whether or not, what everybody cares about right now is like, is he using Advanced Conquerors Haki? And I've seen people go on essays and long threads and stuff about he is or he isn't. I'm just not going to get into that. I think it'll probably become, I understand, I've seen a lot of arguments for both. I understand why some people feel like it's absolutely obvious that it's one way. I see why some people think it's absolutely obvious the other way. I think what's funny is that I did a poll on stream asking whether Zoro's using it or not, and the conclusion was about like 30 something, like close to 30% said he's using it, 30% said he's not using it, and then the remaining 40% said we don't know. So that's about as split as you can get community-wise as to whether or not Zoro's using Advanced Conquerors Haki. I'm just not going to touch this. Hopefully next chapter or a bit further in the fight we'll get better clarification as to what he is doing right now. There's fire on his swords. He didn't really used to do that. Does that definitely mean Advanced Conquerors Haki? I don't know. We see a little black spark thing. Does that definitely mean... I don't know. I don't know how to even think. I can't even, like, I can't even, like, begin to delve into that stuff before we've even solved the general purpose, like, indicators of Advanced Conquerors Haki, let alone whatever Zoro's doing. So there's that. I think Zoro and Lucci's, you know, their little back and forth is cool, but it's just distracting with me trying to think, like, okay, what is Zoro doing right now? How seriously is he, like, how much is he trying? Because if Zoro is, you know, going all out or whatever, then cool. That means that Zoro and Lucci are dead even. This is going to be a high intensity fight that'll probably last a while. If Zoro's still holding back Advanced Conquerors Haki, or if he just started using it or whatever, then maybe this ends soon. I don't know how seriously to take this fight. Is it a placeholder? Is it going to be a long, intense, drawn-out battle for a while? I don't know. So that's its own thing. And then finally, we've got a lot of... I feel like this is the phase of, like, One Piece where Oda set up a bunch of, like, little in an arc, like lots of times, I feel like this has been happening more and more recently. You'll get to a certain point in an arc where like there's lots of like little checkmark things that need to happen, which is like, okay, we need to, like, this character needs to do this, and then we need to, you know, unseal the dome barrier to get the pacifistas back, and then that's going to switch back and forth. I think that we're in basically checklist mode, I think, at the moment, so I am not super invested, I'll just say, in everything that the other Straw Hats and Vegapunk are doing right now, because I feel like there's just a lot of little things that are kind of swapping back and forth between chapters, and we're gonna get to the main stuff when we get to the main stuff. Like, what's the big dramatic moment that this is leading to? It seems like it's something to do with Gorosei Saturn, at least based on the end of the chapter. Most likely him taking control of the Seraphim again in some way, taking control of the Pacifistas. Obviously the Pacifistas, whoever controls the Pacifistas supposedly wins the fight. But yeah, right now it's just a lot of little moving parts and a lot of like little things that it's like, oh no, if we don't do this, then we don't do this. And then this stuff sort of, I think it kind of just gets glossed over as you go. And, you know, I feel like we had a lot of these little mini objectives, basically, for example, in the Wano arc, or even before this, like, let's say in Punk Hazard at a certain point, and at a certain point they kind of just jumble up together, and it's not, you know, they kind of just get resolved on their own, and we get to the main stuff, basically. So that's what I kind of feel like. I felt like we jumped up between a bunch of characters, and they're all yelling certain individual things, and it's just stuff happening to me at this point in time, basically. So not super concerned about that till it becomes a thing. It seems like all of it might come to a head, and things might clear up as to where it is going with all this as of next chapter, so we'll see. And lastly, I want to talk about the Voice of the People, which is a question submitted by one of the top tier of patrons. So Justin Holland asked about what the theme of Luffy versus Akainu will be. If Luffy versus Akainu is going to be a thing, and I do believe more so now, more confidently now, that Luffy versus Akainu will be a thing, just because if we're getting Luffy versus Kizaru, I think if Luffy's already fighting an admiral, then at the end of the day, I do think Luffy's going to fight a fleet admiral. I think it's unlikely that the only major marine that Luffy defeats over the course of the entire series would end up being Kizaru. I think that's unlikely. So if Luffy versus Akainu was up in the air at some point, I think now it's much, much more solidified as being a very likely scenario. So Luffy versus Akainu, this is something I probably want to touch on more in a future video, but I used to think that Luffy versus Akainu would be more so about free will versus authoritarianism. However, as Imu is really shaping up to be that authoritarian figure, I think at this point it makes more sense, and it just feels more fitting that Luffy versus Akainu would be about Luffy's brand of, I feel like it would be more about justice at the end of the day, because that's what Akainu seems to represent the most at the end of the day. The idea of absolute justice, just very clear-cut ideas of right and wrong. You have to live the right way. Every pirate is scum, etc., etc. And Luffy is the total opposite of that. Luffy's not about labels. He's not about, you know, judging people based on just if they fall into this category or that category. Luffy sees the good or the bad in whoever, and he sees everyone as the same. And that's why Luffy's brand of justice that he's carried out throughout the entire story is a much more pure and, I guess, just form of justice than Akainu's very black and white view that doesn't allow for any sort of nuance or understanding. So I think what Luffy represents will clash heavily with what Akainu represents in the regard of justice the most at the end of the day. Hope that answered your question.